When I first became a lawn owner, I heard friends and neighbors criticizing the use of chemicals, and I thought it was a little out there. Um, I used pesticides to control bugs in my house. When my wife got pregnant, I had real second thoughts about soaking the perimeter of my house with chemicals, and I realized that there was a gap under the basement door. And if I sealed the gap, the bugs didn't get inside. So I didn't have to use chemicals anymore. These things, had a big effect on me personally. And they have led me to conclude that a lot of our use of chemicals as, private citizens is just unnecessary. And not only that, but that you really, and this is where I think my public responsibility steps in, you really have to have a very good reason to take the risk. And I think there, as Mr. Elrich said, there is enough concern about the health impact of the chemicals to demonstrate that there is risk involved in using them. And therefore, what should we do? I think the problem is that people trust their government to protect them. They think that their government is reviewing carefully how these chemicals are used and wouldn't let them, wouldn't let people have access to them if they were risky. And unfortunately, that's just not true. And that's really where we step in here. The federal government is letting people down. And I think we have an obligation to act. I want to say a comment also about the alternative approach, which is an education-based approach. As has been said, I think there is integrity in that proposal. But I don't think it functionally works because the basis of it is to say we're going to reduce our use of chemicals by 50% by educating people about the harm of the chemicals. So we would have to compete with the private sector, the companies that are spending millions of dollars all the time to inundate our residents with positive messages about these chemicals. And we would have to somehow combat that with our own advertising campaign to convince people that the chemicals are dangerous. How could I, if I believe that the chemicals are dangerous enough that people should reduce their use dramatically, how can I allow them to be used at all? What is the basis of, what would we have to say to people to get them to change their use by 50%? Is there an example in history, really, of government being able to change behavior through voluntary action by that scope? I can't think of one. It really does take regulation to do it. And so what I conclude is that the end result of the education action is we're right back, and I think implicitly it's possible that was acknowledged, we're right back at a discussion of a restriction of use, as opposed to using the educational tool. But I just imagine what it would be like. What would the advertising campaign be like to get people to reduce their use of chemicals? It would have to scare the daylights out of people, because that's what it takes. How many years did we have education efforts about the dangers of smoking while smoking continued to rise? So I just don't think that's a practical alternative. And I feel that if you accept the fact that the chemicals are dangerous, you have to act. And in fact, nothing really symbolizes our failure more to me than those little yellow signs that get put sometimes on lawns after they've had the chemicals applied. Why would you put something on your lawn that's not safe for children and animals to walk on? I just don't understand that.
The clerk will please call the roll on Bill 5214.
Mr. Elrich?
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Elrich votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Berliner?
No.
Mr. Berliner votes no. Mr. Rice?
No.
Mr. Rice votes no. Mr. Riemer?
Yes.
Mr. Riemer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Katz?
No.
Mr. Katz votes no. Ms. Florine?
Yes.
Ms. Florine votes yes. Mr. Leventhal?
Mr. Leventhal votes yes. Bill 5214 is adopted on a 6-3 vote.